Thank you all for coming. I have to apologize in advance. I have a little bit of a cold, so I'll be speaking like this today. So my name is Naomi Lev. I'm the curator of the show, and I just want to start with thanking our amazing artists, Mónika Sziládi, Aimée Burg, and Tamar Ettun, for doing this show. Hope you get to enjoy before and after the panel. I'd also like to thank BOSI gallery staff for all their hard work. There's also a catalog either view it online or purchase it. And of course, to our amazing panelists, we have Lydia Bell here, Jennifer Krasinski, and Jovana Stokic. I will read their bios so you know who they are a little bit. So further on the left is Jovana Stokic. She is a Belgrade-born, New York-based art historian and curator. She holds a PhD in the Institute of Fine Arts at University. Her dissertation is on the for feminist self-interpretation, 1970-2007, analyzes works of several women artists, Aimée Burg, Martha Hofstra, Jovana since the 1970s, particularly focusing on the notion of self-representation and beauty. Stokic has curated several thematic exhibitions and performance events in the United States, Italy, Spain, and Georgia. Her essays, The Art of Marina Abramovich, Leaving the Balkans, Entering the Other Space, The Other Sides, are appeared in the Palace of the Artists Present in 2010 at the Museum of Modern Art. Stokic was a fellow at the New Museum of Contemporary Art, New York, a researcher at the Whitney Museum, a creator of the Chemo Center Galleries, and the performance curator at Location 1. She has taught art history at New York University, Fashion Institute of Technology, and is also faculty of the MFA Art Practice at the School of Visual Arts. She is now the deputy chair and made curatorial practice at SVA. Jennifer Krasinski is a writer and art critic whose work has appeared in Artful.com, The Village Voice, Art in America, This Magazine's Fine Art Quarterly, Dune, and +1 Film Review, and many other publications. She is currently faculty at the MFA Art Criticism and Writing Program at SVA. She is also the recipient of a Creative Capital and Warhol Foundation's Arts Writers Grant for a forthcoming essay on the cultural critic Jill Johnston. Lydia Bell, who is beside me, is a curator and arts administrator based in New York. She recently joined Art Piece as director of programming, where she oversees artist submissions for the program's exhibition and the Artiste Grant program. From 2011 to 2014, Lydia was development and curatorial associate at Dance Space Project, where she worked on the acclaimed platform series with Judy Taylor. Bell has also contributed to projects with Echo and Puma, Movement Research, Stan Miller, OAM Company, and the Institute for Curatorial Practice and Performance. She has written for publications such as Judson Now, Museum and Curatorial Studies Review, and Critical Correspondence, and spoken on national and international panels on the subject of interdisciplinary performance. Lydia is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Wesleyan University and the Institute for Curatorial Practice and Performance at the Wesleyan University. So, sorry. For our discussion, we will, so what I asked the panelists is kind of to bring their own take on the show and to respond from their own personal experience and professional experience. So we will do that, and then we'll have a great conversation from what they, their thoughts and their, explanations of the show or ideas about what comes out of the show or just in general thoughts surrounding the themes that arise from their experience here. And then we'll have a discussion and Q&A. So we'll start with Lydia.
Hi. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, BOSI, my fellow panelists, and the artists, who I understand are the three ladies sitting over there, smiling. And the great thing
that if we have questions, the artists are here. They're a little bit shy sometimes, but they're active when you approach them.
You can also jump in and correct us if we're saying erroneous things. But yeah, I actually wanted to start off by mentioning that Jill Johnston, the subject of Jennifer's research, is sort of my personal art panel hero. I heard recently that when she was invited to be on panels like this one, she would come in costume as a persona, turning the whole panel into a performance. So maybe we can consider that for next time. So tonight I prepared a lens through which to look at this exhibition that I usually use in a performance or dance context, but I thought it would be fun and useful for us to try it on here. When writers or curators talk about performance, we tend to focus on the relationship between the performers and the audience. This is, of course, at the core of the performance exchange, an empathetic response between the one being watched and the one watching. In a white box setting, like this gallery, where we enter the space to interact with objects, this loop sort of shuts down in a sense. The object is not intrinsically aware of being watched as a human would be. So interestingly for us, these three artists are very much problematizing that traditional exchange between body and object by demanding of audiences very specific modes of interactions with objects. So I'll give you some examples. In Amy's work, we're confronted with objects that appear to have utility, but we know through various social cues that in this context we're not actually supposed to interact with them. It's good to think of this from the point of view of maybe a toddler entering the space. I have a feeling they would make a beeline for the TP, which is what I also did. I'm not sure what that says about me. And start looking for things to bang the objects against. In fact, this is what we get to see Amy doing with her son in the video that's installed inside of the sculpture, right there. Joyfully performing these imagined rituals with the objects that we see in the installation. I think what's kind of wonderfully complicated about this is the way that Amy has installed the video. It's not at a sort of adult height, it actually is at a child-sized height. And so in order to sort of complete that empathetic loop between the viewer and the performers in the video, there's this physical action of bending down, leaning in, and inserting yourself into the sphere of the sculpture. Tamar's work, too, is also really interesting to me in this regard, and these issues of how we translate experience and exchange between performance and object are really core to her practice. Many of her sculptures here have a direct relationship to the body in terms of how they're made, so they're cast onto the bodies of her performance collaborators. I would argue, though, that the resulting sculptures initiate a different kind of empathetic exchange, an exchange much more related, actually, to how we experience images of trauma. So these body casts are actually the negative of a body's shape, and they're also fragmented, detached, dismembered. This is a little embarrassing to quote a person who's in the room, but I did want to quote Tamar here in an interview this year from Art Radar. She writes, "My work is an inherently failed attempt to control the horror of death through proposing the human body as a permanent material that surrenders to ephemerality and change in nature." So if we extend Tamar's proposition of the body as permanent material, then this exchange that we're talking about becomes less about body to object and more about object to object, or maybe body to body, depending on what your conception is of what it means for a body to be permanent material. And then finally, in Mónika's work, there are a couple layers of exchange happening that I don't even fully understand yet, so maybe we can ask her about that. There's this initial exchange of the artist going to a meetup or an event, I think. And then there is later a sort of exchange with the artist and the material in terms of manipulation, which is what I want to ask you about later. And then finally an exchange between the viewer's experience with the object in the space. But I think what's interesting is what Mónika asks from the viewer in that sort of final stage. It's kind of ambiguous in an interesting way to me. Is she asking for empathy, a sort of joyful look at crazy humans in this crazy world, or is she asking us to confront our own sort of dark human judgments in which we situate ourselves as maybe critical of how we see others in these kinds of contexts, women's bodies, or sort of critical of society? I think here that empathetic loop gets a little bit detached, actually, with this darker side of human nature, and I'm really intrigued by how Mónika's playing with that. And then in closing, I just wanted to mention Michael Fried as a reference point for this conversation. His essay, Art and Objecthood, from 1967, which bemoans the theatricality of minimalist art, sort of inadvertently paving the way for us looking at conceptual art and a theoretical understanding of what that is. So Fried felt that this robbed the viewer of a sense of transcendence, but I think today we can understand that awareness of materiality is key to a whole lot of really good ways of reading, interesting ways of reading and understanding 3D objects. That's all from me for now, but I'd be curious to hear from my fellow panelists about other sort of theatrical ways of reading 3D work.
For that. Hello. One of the things that I was really intrigued by when Naomi invited all of us to do the panel is that she said very clearly she wanted each of us to be in this room, not only from our own perspectives, but from kind of how we traverse the art world. So I began to think about being a critic, an art critic, and what the performance of that might be, not just simply the way in which maybe a critic or any kind of formal audience member would navigate a space, and how long you linger in front of an object or an artwork. I don't know, just kind of thinking about this kind of thinking on your feet kind of idea. And then, of course, thinking about objects, the object that every critic has with them is the notebook. Artists have them too, many people have this, but the text in a notebook, as you already know, is always kind of these beginnings of thoughts. Sort of half-formed ideas and responses, questions. Usually when I'm taking notes in the show, I ask myself a lot of questions, give myself a lot of prompts. I was just noticing this when I was looking through thinking, God, what can I present this evening that might be slightly compelling to you? I don't know that this will be, but I thought that what I would do is actually read the notes that I took after looking at the show, and hopefully there will be some ideas of use or disuse, which might be useful. So, inside, throughout, overall note, think of the relationships between objects and bodies in performance. Are these props? Does costume count as an object if it's objectified? Maybe. So props, things. What else? Oh, and I apologize if these things don't make sense, because I'm not sure they do. Think more about the currency of popular conversations around the sentience of objects, bodies and objects as ontological equals, neither above the other nor more central to the understanding of the world in which we live, or of its stories, or to the radical undoing of easy meaning. Tamar, stage sculptures all around the floor, a playful semiotics here at work, or is it meaning blunted for the sake of amusement, of fictions, delight, i.e. instruments that can be played, hand in glove becomes hand as glove, becomes glove as prosthesis. Rewriting use value. Think of this as a kind of visual script for the play unfolding here. There was a performance, but I'm not sure that's necessary information given what's going on right now. The drama of things. What genre would this be? Object comedies? Prop tragedies? People, actors, bodies missing but not missed. Instead, form holds memory of her, of whoever sat in the studio wearing plaster for a while. Question, does it take that long? I hope not, because I don't want to talk about duration anymore, ever. Mónika, photographs, collages, sometimes clearly, always eerily, very taken by how she has captured something of built-in obsolescence of the body, of the photograph, of an event, of a moment. These images, sharp and sweet and stark, crumble somehow before your very eyes, or unravel, or untether. Better verb here, please. Faces are always so distracting in a portrait, so now I can finally see who's here and who's not, assess the situation. Objects, laptop, microphone, balloon, gun, hair, ornament, question mark? Breast pump, harness, necktie, necessary to set the scene and tell us something, but props are not people. Can we have a discussion that excludes fetish, shine, projected selves to get somewhere deeper, newer about these characters? Or is it the shallow, as opposed to the surface, its echoes and its particular frequencies that we need to explore further? Aimée, I couldn't live here because it's not for me. Build your own, imagine your own is what I hear these sculptures in this space saying. Hands appear throughout the show that here are invisible except, well, in the video, but except on the surfaces of these objects she's created, crafted. Note, craft is not a dirty word. Objects are magical, momentous, tiny, of practical use in a world far more precious and fleeting than our own. Performance here of rituals so personal, but not inscrutable, and highly conductive. Fuck yeah for being a mother and an artist. Double creator points here, fueling an idea of elsewhere for all of us who enter here, reminding us of our own elsewheres. Elsewhere, meanwhile, also, think of words that articulate parallel times and places, that connect many points in time and tether many times to a single point. One point, I disappointed myself when I asked for permission to stand in a teepee. Why didn't I see or understand or just ignore, or not ignore, that it was open for a reason? Final question, maybe better for the first question. Why didn't I think of feminism when we know this work? Does feminism too have a built-in obsolescence?
Like I have to perform after you, and yours. I have to perform after yours. I have to start first by really thanking Naomi for opening this panel for us to do with whatever we want with it. And artists are here, our audience. I don't like that. I could not possibly read from your work, and I'm using this like a rather safe position of, not of a critic, but of a, artist facilitator and a curator. And I wanted to problematize this exhibition as an object in itself. So I took this object and I enjoyed it, and I cannot tell you that you are not supposed to leave this space without communing with the work, notwithstanding chairs, notwithstanding just to go and walk around it and just kind of interact. And this is how I wanted to start with, my reading. I dare not say, what you did. I think it's wonderful, but I was I cannot now give you an equivalent of an experience that we are, because we are now coexisting with words. So I wanted to do something else, and I'm asking you, preamble to this is please don't be angry if I talk about other artists that are not in the show. I'm not doing you this service. No, I'm elevating the work. This is, I don't want to be a jerk, but really what I want to do is to think with artists and to really hear more afterwards from the artist about this exhibition as and where it took me when I took the walk. So I wrote something that is called presumptuously, of course, on cultivating her garden, about my musings, my informal musings on contemporary women artists and labor. So on this particular occasion, this is really a inspired show in the best sense of the word, inspired with the presence of the spirit, in the way that you were talking about objects and bodies. I propose this discourse that does something bodily. It meanders through a metaphorical garden inhabited by women making art, as we are now present in that garden. And I use this, I start, it's my discourse starts with this real or magical garden. Like it's really an imagination, so for me it's real. Magical Garden of the Women Without Men, the 2009 film feature by the Iranian-American artist Shirin Eshad. And the central poetic locus of the film is this garden as the only place where women can achieve freedom from persecution in a severely misogynistic climate of the 50s Iran. But that garden for me is like a starting point, to make this equivalent of the space of freedom. And I also use this idea of walking or being lost in the garden with bifurcating forms. To quote, presumptuously quote Borges. But I wanted this actual meandering that I am presenting it with you to be meant as an embodiment of this performative speculation about the ways of being and creating for women artists today. So this is my question that I'm opening. How is it? And I'm not asking artists and putting them on the spot, saying, the equivalent of walking through the show for me is like asking these questions of being a creative artist. So I suggest a possibility of an insight in a specific set of artistic practices that invert the notion of matriarchal utopia. I am totally above that idea. I think it's wonderful for what it's worth. But here I would like to focus on spaces of freedom that are not that literal, without being worldly, or what Caroline Christoph-Bakarjev calls worldly. So this is what I kind of situate these works as well, and we can argue about that. But the garden thus emerges as a metaphor of the space of autonomy and an opening to non-patriarchal genealogies, in the spirit of playful meiotics. So meiotics, this Socratic method invoked, is understood as the art of giving birth to ideas, which is conceived in how very appropriate, to bring meiotics. I think Naomi will have to say something about that. So giving birth to ideas are conceived as struggling for birth that celebrates female labor, and I will just remind you that Socrates' mother was Tamar, which means a midwife, and her profession inspired him to characterize his own profession. So at the same time, I'm aiming here to reposition the artistic labor in the context of professionalization of arts worker as they are today, and that's how I'm bringing them back to the reality. That's why it's not only a magical, metaphorical space. I really want to ground it. And I would like to expand this paradigm of meiotics as a production of knowledge and arts both. So further, I would take a cue from feminist historian Silvia Federici's study Revolution at Point Zero, Housework, Reproduction and Feminist Struggle. And Federici's 40-plus years of research has offered a powerful stand against capitalism naturalization of the exploitation of every aspect of women's productive and reproductive life. So she theorizes the nature of domestic labor, social reproduction, and women's struggle to provide a constructive alternative within patriarchal capitalist coordinates. And I'm trying and at least considering applying her criticism by focusing on art making as labor here. So I would like to, suggest we talk about that. And women who are produced by women discussed here and actually embodied here, for me, I see them as act of revolt, but also a nurturing praxis. So a creation that is beyond patriarchal realm, but it's not kind of revengeful act. And there are many other artists that I would like to bring into, not as I said, not to talk about them, but just to bring into the discourse. Kate Gilmore's, showing the discomfort of female labor, or Mika Rottenberg's investigation of labor. Paula Hayes, works with, Garden of Carol Sarah Z's, thematizing of art and labor beyond the realm of utility, something that is also useful here. Rochelle Feinstein's, author fictions and Karin Schneider's work that brings relationship of the object to the institutional and vital space. Just some of the points like not to compare your work, but just like to kind of situate with this practice in contemporary women artists' work. And I would just continue this opening, whatever it is, by arguing in my meandering that the further inclusive expansion of the notion, and this is what Naomi asked us to say, and this is where, when you said this, the inherent obsolescence of the feminism, for me, one of the ways out of is the notion of parafeminism, and this is how I see the way out of this kind of maze or a dead end. And as Amelia Jones reminded us, that this feminism is a conceptual model of critique and exploration, is simultaneously parallel and building on earlier feminisms. So I see that as a kind of new opening, side by side and beyond, inclusive and inviting, nurturing, and truly creative. So this is where I stand right now. So I cannot wait to stand corrected.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I think we can start by addressing your thoughts and your questions. I mean, one of the reasons I kind of left it open for the panelists to bring their own take was to create a dynamic, mostly a spontaneous conversation, because they're coming from, similar backgrounds but very different, roles in the art world in a way. So I wanted them to interest each other, so we didn't prepare for this. This is, I guess, a sort of performative panel, and it matches some of the themes in the show. I can tell you that when I started working with 3 artists, they all came from the MFA program, and they are good friends, and they really wanted to work together, and the theme was not, obvious. The works are very different, and it took us a while to kind of determine what the things that arise from their work. And I think this is what makes the combination of the work so interesting, because they're so different, approaches. And I guess this is something I wanted to bring in the panel as well, to kind of mirror that combination of people and approaches. So maybe Lydia, you want to address the other panelists with some questions, or the artists?
Sure. Yeah, I was interested in connecting what Jovana was talking about with female labor to the modes of production in this exhibition that you just started to describe. I was really struck when I was asking you about the exhibition that the artist had come to you. And I think these sort of modes of collaboration that come from friendship and kinship are really interesting to examine through some of the lens that you were trying to bring up a little bit. So I don't want to put the artist on the spot, but I'm sort of curious about that act of bringing an exhibition to a curator to curate, and sort of how that came about. It's great as a curator when artists come to you and have a show ready to go.
Yeah, I guess we didn't really have a show prepared. But since we went to school together, we knew that we have something in common, and that we would want to investigate it further. And I think we met Ms. Naomi like almost 2 years ago, right? Or a year and a half ago. And then things started developing, and then Mónika said last week that she felt like subconsciously we were all kind of aiming towards the same thing. And then sitting here now, we see that all these bodies, but I think it's kind of a recent development.
Yeah, we worked completely independently in our own little corner, but somehow it came together, I think, and perhaps there is definitely like a subconscious communication between the work of art and the audience, right? Like that's, you don't have to talk to me, you talk to me through this, and the fact that that the words talk together and we never planned it is kind of magical to me, and we don't know how it happened. So, and perhaps Naomi saw it happening, yes, you can tell us. Me?
Thank you. Yeah, we started a process where we met together and then we decided to kind of have each of the artists kind of go her separate ways and do her thing without considering what the other artists are doing in a way. And we came back together towards the end. So it's interesting how these things work. And I think, yes, you know.
One thing is that actually we did show the work to each other in the middle of the summer. So something must have happened there without expressly talking about it. We sent each other in.
Also constantly emailing each other, like potential scenes, like always brainstorming things. So it wasn't completely isolated.
Yeah, and I think, for example, the material for the TP, I think you made a decision based on my flex.
Yeah, like it happened, or I was thankful that it worked because of my flex, I guess. Yeah.
So the subtleties are interesting in that sense, I think, you know, how you did connect, but it's in very subtle ways and formalistic ways that, you know, it comes as hints in the works. And I think, I don't remember who said this, but coming into the show and seeing Tamar's hands and then looking at Mónika's hands, that was probably Anne Schwartz. She came and she talked about the hands and how they're kind of very dominant in the front, and then you go in and there's like a lot of hands involved, and they have a purpose in what they're doing.
Do I have to say something about hands, or
You can talk about legs.
legs? That's something. Okay, you know what? Let's really talk about the presence of the body. We are moving, in the gallery, and Lydia eloquently, brought this into the discussion. But it's kind of, it becomes almost kind of de rigueur to kind of have an exhibition that have some kind of live activation. If you don't do like some kind of live activation, your exhibition is solid. And I feel that this exhibition is like trying to gently rebel against it, to say like, look, what is there in all these kind of echoes and fragments and traces and think like in the logic of Tamar's performance. I'm just looking at it because I went to see performance unrelated to the show, but like it's kind of spilling out on the street. Which Tamar did in Tamar's troupe, or delegated performance, that she's now notorious for. when she's like evoking, these bodies and limbs, right? Like when you said legs, and like, yeah, legs coming out of the garbage can. You know what I'm talking about? That Tamar has this piece when a person is diving into the garbage can, so what you see is the legs, right? And like it is dismembered kind of like uncomfortable place. Going back to the fragment and to the body. So to your success of putting things together that are not like kind of forcing the idea, that's something that one can read from the show, like if you're benevolent. Leader of the show, is that this is not like there is a topic, there is my agenda, I want to promote women artists, I want to promote these artists who are working with this, feminine presence and, you know, like, and labor and this and that. And I'm going to kind of impose that topic or, you know, kind of, or not even impose, but just to be, you know, like persuasive enough, you know, curatorially to say, I think this show for me read as this kind of, not a collaboration, but kind of a nice coexistence. And so that's how I said, like, in the beginning, I read, you know, exhibition as an object, but like exhibition as a body, that for me, you know, it was not like kind of, you know, taking one instead of the other, doing these juxtapositions in order to, you know, in order to force the idea back home, but like really thinking about the bodily presence, not as a kind of a necessity or, you know, or kind of grasping and desperately invoking a body through objects, but kind of like more poetic ways of speaking of the body and its absence. You know, this is not like a kind of a utopian show at all, but it has this, you know, certain, certain, I don't know, like a gentleness, even if it shows liminal actions. I'm just looking at images behind them, really gentle, you know, but like liminal spaces of representation. So this is what what I had in mind, you know, coming from, you know, practice of curating performance. But anyways, I would like to hear, you know, this is not a compliment. Yeah, Naomi did a great job. But I would like to hear, you know, that kind of a line of thinking when you put things together in treatment of practice of these artists. You know, this is also a commercial gallery, and, you know, they're showing objects. You know, and it's like it's hard to pitch to a gallery and like, I'm just going to be there.
First of all, the gallery was very open to, we were open to experimentation. We just brought what we wanted to, basically. We didn't have any restrictions. So that was a great thing. And, I mean, if we talk about performance, one of the reasons we titled this panel Performing Objects, actually, I think you mentioned that phrase, performing objects, Jovana. I found it interesting because Tamar always talks about objects that they become performative. And this is a theme that also came up from working with them, because obviously Tamar does performance, her objects are performative. With Mónika, it's you know, it's not as front and center, but it's, you know, her approaching, you know, these situations, the meetups, the conventions, and you know, all these subcultural events. That's, I feel, a performative aspect on her side, but also she catches the figures in a very performative and dramatic state. And one of the things that was interesting is that when I first wrote the essay for the catalog, I kind of treated you know, these situations as secretive events. I really thought these are like, you know, these places that people go to and we don't know of, but these are not secretive events. These are, you know, open to the public events, and she just captures these moments that are so, you know, so particular and so odd, and they're so us. I mean, she can probably capture me in a very awkward situation, and it would seem that I'm, you know, can I say freak? You know, a little bit bizarre person, but it's really interesting. So that is something, you know, that is to be taken under consideration, and also the way she hanged the works is, you know, treating each photograph as an object and as an installation. And also, this is something we can address later, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the height. If you notice the height of the works, they're lower, and the reason they're lower is to fit normal-sized woman, which is interesting, I think, and very subtle. And with Aimée, you know, the performance is, you know, in her daily life, and then, you know, she built this enigmatic world, this sign language that only after like 10 conversation I could like understand what each object means. And it was really interesting because, you know, it's her own, you know, it is like a child in a way, in a good sense. She uses her imagination to create, you know, performance, and she works with with her family and her son, and these are things that are very relevant to the show. So, yeah, it's just, this whole element is very, very subtle, I agree, and that's why I thought it was so interesting. Did you want to ask something, one of the artists? Okay.
I don't want to say no, have anything to add. I'm not judging.
Do you want to add anything to this?
No, I was just wondering, maybe I had a
They
question.
should have one mic. I don't like this and giving them mic.
Lydia, you had a question from the beginning.
Yeah, I was just curious about the process of manipulation with the images, and if you could describe that a little bit.
It's digital montage through Photoshop. Basically, I take the figure out of the context occasionally, and then I put it in another context, or sometimes I would like weave two images together. The panoramics are done that way, so the figure is not necessarily taken out of context, but the context is merged, and so that way the space becomes flatter, and you have there's more cues that it's a collage, but in something like this, maybe there's less cue because it's a little bit, spatially it makes a little bit more sense, but then the light doesn't make sense. So what I'm interested in is blurring the believable with the not believable. So it's just like a little bit weird, it's a little bit visually irritating, but it could happen that way. And I guess my idea when I'm working on it, this could have happened. It could have happened, but it didn't, but that's okay. Because it's fiction anyway. It's great, out of context photograph.
Yeah. I'm a very gullible viewer. I thought that these were sort of taken as is, and it was only on my iPhone reading the review that just came out a few hours ago of the show. I was like, oh, there's a process of manipulation. Good to know.
And I think it's important that you believe, because we believe photographs, and that's problematic. Right?
Okay, so this is also promotion of the catalog that you're like everyone.
I want to quote from there.
So, Giorgio Agamben, one of my favorite philosophers in the last year, due to my thesis, there's one quote that I like that I wrote for, I quoted for Tamar's recent essay. So the question, where is the thing, is inseparable from the question, where is the human? Like the fetish, like the toy, things are not properly anywhere, because their place is found on this side of object and beyond the human, in a zone that is no longer objective or subjective, neither personal nor impersonal, neither material nor immaterial, but where we find ourselves suddenly facing these apparently so simple unknowns, the human, the thing. I'm quoting this because you mentioned something, Jennifer, about elsewhere. Meanwhile, also all these different, words that came up during the show. I'd like to hear more about that.
About the sort of parallel time, or
Yeah.
I think just looking around the show, maybe Amy's work in particular sort of sparked off that idea that here I am looking at an elsewhere, a kind of, whether it's a fictive place or whether it's a kind of a culture or an intimacy or some ritual, something like that. And I think that's always something, I think many artists deal in that, that you're always speaking about now, then, and these kinds of alien times and worlds that can collide within the kind of creative context. And I also was curious, there is this kind of wave, or just going off of Agamben and then kind of, moving that forward, this sort of object-oriented ontology and these kinds of Graham Harman philosophers like this who are positing that, objects and humans are, in fact, we should deal with these things, rather if, philosophy has been too human-centric for too long, and that objects and humans coexist, that a person should be considered the same as a table, as a floor. I'm giving you desperately wiki version of this, but one of the, this has, I think, influenced and kind of infused, if not art practices, in certain cases, yes, art practices, but certainly in the way we've begun to think about the art object, maybe opposing, both in opposition, but maybe in dangerous support of the kind of capitalist overload that we're getting when we come into the art. That commodity, exactly, thank you, that's the word I needed. And so thinking about, the sentient object, the spiritual object, the fact that these things are more than just their sort of form. I guess this is all old hat, but people like Mark Leckie who take this very seriously and actually, produce videos with, talking refrigerators, telling us their life story and so forth. And there is that kind of energy in this room. Hello? Oh, there. In and around, Tamar's work certainly, I think, is playing with body and object, but also these objects that become something else from somewhere else and are speaking to, I think I talked about it, kind of semiotic resonance, I don't know what the story is and I will never know, so I'll just sit in front of this object, I will look and stare. I don't know if anyone else has ideas, I'm just babbling, I think. But if anyone else wanted it, I don't know if anyone else has that kind of experience in here, or if that was something that you were thinking about them certainly.
In terms of
just in terms of the other lives of objects, or like
absolutely. And yeah, I mean, one of the things, and this is maybe a little bit of stuff to the side, but one of the things that did come up on the show is rituals, and rituals obviously relate to spirituality. But the objects here are very mundane, so the relationship with them, this is a day-to-day interaction. So, I mean, absolutely, and also the works. Okay, so if we're talking about rituals, Tamar's works is based on this again systematic rituals. That's what her, she takes religious rituals and kind of transform them or translate them to her own doings, and maybe she can talk more about that. And with Mónika, it feels that the gatherings that she goes to are kind of cultish and ritualistic. People kind of, again, it's my interpretation. Please feel free to say whatever you think you need to do about them. And then Aimée, it's the spiritual and mysticism, they're a little bit taking everyday, tasks and making them kind of ritualistic or, we call it historical and educational in a way. But I'd love you guys to respond to that feeling, to the notion of rituals and how it corresponds with everyday objects.
Or I even add to that, how does ritual correspond not just to the everyday object, but to the art object in particular, right? That's related to, right? I mean, that's just, I'm tagging on what she said.
I'm thinking of ritual in a different way. When I think of, if you don't mind, I'm just going to veer up straight, just get derailed. What I'm interested in is our relationship with technology. And some of the objects in the photographs are electronic devices like phone, the laptop, and a microphone, or like an electronic press pump, and also our relationship to photography. The one on the right hand side is the camera, the video camera. And since I've been thinking a lot about photography recently, not necessarily with this show, it seems to me that photography is becoming one of the most important rituals in events because everybody's taking photographs in order to share them. So we get together and these electronic devices interfere with our interactions and we communicate outwards, not with the people we are with. So be it a communication device or a photograph. So it's this how the mass communication influences events or physical contact is what I'm really interested in. seems to be quite ritualistic. And the other objects, or the garments or the robe, for me is metaphorical to that same kind of attachment to technology and how it can bind us or liberate us, however we use it.
I guess for me the ritual was kind of, I don't know, I want to start by saying like I was very nervous and tentative about making work, like being a mother, you know, like, I mean, I don't know, when it comes when I hear that I think, oh, gross, I don't want to go into that. I wouldn't go with cheesy or anything, but it was a lot about just how you learn and like how do you share what was important to me when I was learning. And it was kind of like, so it kind of became like, not an oral history, but a visual history kind of storytelling. It was saying like how, because a lot of this stuff is like, I don't know, sorry, ways I would play and then seeing how ways my son plays and kind of like just trying to show him what was important to me, I guess. I think that's it.
I guess I started by thinking about Christian as a visual in most of my projects. I started with some kind of a system, and then I have a set, a very strict rules, then I can feel very free and do a lot of other things. So this piece I started by thinking about the similarities between religious rituals and OCD, and how people that have OCD or people that have their own personal rituals, that it serves the same kind of comfort as a religious or some kind of communal ritual, like celebrating Thanksgiving every year in the same day, and then touching the front of the door 3 times before you start the day. And thinking about that and like artistic practice, and then how can someone enter this world that is very private and personal, either by making these rituals or as an artist who is performing them, and especially when you do performances, and then what is the role of the audience? So how can I transform that into an object that will capture this kind of ritualistic sort of rule aspect, and then let the other people also enter it.
I want to just for a minute talk about, Jovana, you wanted to discuss feminism and labor, or art and labor, and female art and labor, and I'd love to hear more about that. Especially after we talked a little bit, and I've been talking to a few female professionals, and they've been raising the notion of feminism, and also the Brooklyn Rail had a big issue about feminism rising, the September issue. And I just, this show happened naturally without, being particular about men or women. And but for the panel, I really made a conscious decision to bring female panelists. And I would like to hear what your thoughts about that are. I mean, in regards to what feminism is now, if you can define that at all.
In 2 minutes, like definition and where we are and like what are the solution. Like in Monty Python when they're like doing the in search of lost time, crossed in 2 minutes. Like something like that. Where we are as feminists, where we're going with the feminism. Okay, so Naomi came to me and she said, are you a feminist? What's going on with feminist art historian? Are you saying you're a feminist? Did you read Brooklyn Rail feminism emerging, re-emerging? It's constantly, this fifth current, and there is a current, and there's like a wave, and it's like we're swimming, and it's like, like all these liquids, and so it's like, and then like they die, they re-emerge, right? And so this is like a feminist rising, like everywhere, and like, so I'm in the States for more than a decade, and I come as a feminist, and they're like, okay, this is not now, this is not a good moment, and then like, I'm doing my thing, and then 2007, bam, whack, wham, back, when I'm talking about whack was the biggest feminist historical survey of the second wave feminism and global feminism show here in Brooklyn Museum, Secular Center opens, there is an interest, okay, and there is the biggest conference because MoMA, of course, wants to do, now feminism, they're doing it, like women in art, that's it, right? And so like 2007, 2008, gone, right? Like we solved all the problems, museum co-opted the thing, like it's a PC to have them there, and that's it. And then 7 years after, let's bring it up, because still inequality exists, still, the patriarchal condition of inequality exists, but like, let's try to do something, because, and then I feel like this is really not good, because this to me looks like, anything goes, because like we're just mentioning it, so it's like we feel good, and there is an opening, like a legal space. Let's do a legal space, for it. Like, let's get a second here, and let's start discussion where things really are. Here is where I see it. Helen Molesworth, the forward-thinking and now powerful lady in curatorial work. For those of you who don't know, she became a chief curator of MoCA. After stellar career of putting shows of women and non-women, right, in contemporary U.S. institutions, was the first one to grapple with it. MoMA invited her, and she wrote an essay how to install as a feminist. Because it wasn't like a practical kind of guidance how to install as a feminist, and she was bold enough, to attack, like head on, that it's not only about genealogies and inserting into the canon, kind of, like to make it PC, or like, there was some, there is Paul's wife. Let's put her in. So she wrote eloquently, what are the needs of rethink of feminist curating, but that was 7 years ago. And then I did not see in the discourse anything happening. I was like, how's that possible? It's there, but I know that how's that not possible. And we have new generation of curators who are kind of fierce, and who are either like Naomi, you say, okay, I'm going to do my thing, or who are like making a front and say, okay, I'm a feminist curator. I will tell you how to install a feminist date, the cue from Molesworth, and one of them, very boldly published. I don't know if it's published yet, but the book stems from the show that was in Swiss Institute called Descartes' Daughter, and one of these new generation curators grapples with this notion of feminist curator. So I'm not going to rehearse her ideas and her ways of getting out of it, but just for the sake, her name is Piper Marshall, and her way of looking at things is exactly what you said. It's not only lowering the height because we are smaller than it's obvious thing. It's not like we are adjusting galleries to our flows and sizes. It's to rethink all the relations between the artists, what I try to bring with the authorship in my own text, and also to rethink the relationship between this coming together of producers in making an exhibition, and this inclusiveness and this kind of horizontal thinking, rhizomatic thinking, if you will, and not only thinking but like this scroll as an exhibition. So, having this notion of meandering in the garden and the scroll for me is a way to kind of, and I think this is like really, not because an exhibition is like a spread, and this gallery is really kind of scroll like like space, but like for me was inspiring to start the discussion. So I wouldn't start from that, like, define the feminism for you, and like, are you or are you not, or what do you think about, you know, like positioning. I would just like, you know, try to ask the questions of feminist curating and, you know, and artists being women, and artists as non-women also rethinking these questions of agency, of authorship, of the beautiful poetic resistance to commodification of the object. So what you brought, like, in speculative theory or in application of speculative theory in art making. I mean, I don't think the theory came before making, you know, they go hand in hand with the zeitgeist. All this like resistance to object being this like stolid exchange commodity is like several ways out, you know, co-authorship, animal co-authorship, you know, to say the least, you know, like, or, you know, or bringing children, or bringing, you know, people who are of different kind of sensitivities, what was considered outsiderish, right? So this is the climate for the inclusiveness that I see, and that I see in your practice as well. So this is my stream of consciousness. When you touch the feminism, this is what you get.
No, I just add to that, or I'm not even adding to that, instead of like we're reacting to it. I mean, I think one of the interesting things you can see right now is not only the Brooklyn Rail issue, but also Nicole just had their Future Feminism show that was created, you know, by a collective of men and women and transgender, thank you. And we have a young woman at Columbia University who is carrying around a mattress, and we are dealing with what that means and what she is bringing to the discourse. And so I think feminism is intense and alive and very wild and vibrant, and we're learning as we go on. And then, not to sort of retract, but then I come into a show like this, and as I said, I didn't think about the word feminism at all in this funny way until it was time to, if that makes any sense. And I think part of it is that these ideas now are so embedded. The body is embedded in the work. It's a given in the work. Yes, we don't have to, as you say, kind of point it out all the time and say this is about the body or this is about the woman, but
or femininity. Yeah. You know, it's not about femininity. Yeah, female bodies, you know, like kind of canon of beauty, but it's, I don't see the show because, femininity in general is soft colors, you know, pretty things like fluffy.
exactly.
Yeah, I also feel compelled because you brought up sort of representation on the panel, that, I don't know, this is what sort of feminism looks like. It's maybe a very white and actually fairly blonde version of it. So I just would sort of encourage, yeah.
Construct, because gender is a construct, so blondness is a construct.
I guess I would just sort of encourage it, just, I don't know, I feel like there's still work to do in that regard, and of course there are male feminists and many different ways of representing what feminism might be on a panel, so I just feel like that has to be said.
So I agree, I have to say, I mean, that it wasn't an intention, you know, for me it's very hard to define feminism. I don't know how to define it, and I don't refer to myself as a feminist per se as a definition, because I really do equality, and once you take feminism as a word and take it apart from other people, or then you make separation, and that's not something I'm interested in doing. However, the role of feminism and its purpose, I guess, is something is a different story. So maybe the word is not one I would use, but I would use the purpose and, you know, the means. And yeah, I guess we can open. I mean, I have some questions. So yeah, let's open questions to the audience. I'd love to see what you guys are thinking or have questions about.
Okay, thanks. I was really enjoying this, framing of performativity, and we're in a moment where it's not just theater and spectacle, but also gender identity, and also objects can be understood under that rubric. And with Mónika's work, what sounded really interesting was the way that there's all these clashing perspectives that come together, and so things look almost right, but not quite right, and that is maybe what most came to mind when you were talking earlier about post-feminist moment and the sense of, these images are a little bit kind of unhinged, like not quite there, but the sense of how we might communicate a moment in which equality is understood as desirable, but is not quite understood as describable, potentially. But maybe my question is most for Jovana, that sense of the object and quantification, and there are certain sex worker activists who would talk about the ways in which selling one's body is a feminist act, and that in the context of the commercial gallery, where the object is the thing that is a sold commodity, I wonder if there are ways that we could think about that as progressive, and not only just as objects that are sort of built to sort of issue what might be otherwise understood as a actual commodity of a more generally desirable form.
I'm not sure if I understood correctly. You will correct me. But just when you mentioned sex workers, I was thinking of a cynical interpretation that like prostitute is the kind of the ultimate capitalist kind that owns the means of production. So it's like a closed system, but we know that's not the case. It's kind of reading because it's like, what about societal repressive moments of other things? Okay, but like having said that, I think it's very important to allow this kind of gentle resistance to happen. So I'm never like doing like either or. Like the object is there like to be a rogue object, and it's not going to be sold because it's going to rebel against commodification. I believe that there are different ways of inserting into the system that is like probing the status quo, but like kind of also working with it, like in order to get what you want from it. So I don't know, does that answer the question? It's like my utopia, how can the object be, having both ways and making money off it? Because like going back to, if you remember, like my first thesis was of artistic labor, was the idea of what's the contemporary, what are the contemporary parameters of artist as a producer of material goods and also an agent of his own. And how you're going to achieve that agency, within the system. You're not living. I understand that you ladies who went to fancy schools and fancy diplomas, you're not going to live outside of the systems in log cabins and create work. You want to work within the art world. So that's how I'm trying to position this possibility of rebellion, or just acknowledging us being aware and probing. So I don't know, is this just a justification that I feel comfortable even if these work serve several purposes. How does that answer the question? You're mapping.
I love both and utopias. Yes.
Well, like if that we wouldn't have this beautiful show if we didn't agree on this kind of transactions. So as long as transactional is not the only way of our being in the art, that's fine for me. I might talk about it, artists should talk about it, but anyway, it's kind of a show, so go on.
There is a question. I have somebody who will ask a probing question.
Okay.
In the second row, gentleman, non-woman, is asking a question.
It's interesting coming into the show. I also felt it wasn't a utopian show at all, and that even though I was looking at work by women and a show about women, I felt that the theme, especially in front of the gallery, had a lot to do with subjugation. But as you're talking, the bodies are cut off from their identities, and they're made to sort of shine and gloss with capitalism, where they're sort of frozen. And there's a way of reading all of that just in terms of subjugation. But the male blanks too, very much in the same pose. And that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about the history of feminism. In 2008, with the financial crisis, everybody experienced just how quickly capitalism could collapse their lives. And so the totality of subjugation of all bodies, men and women, was made present to us. And in recent years, with the Snowden sort of revelations, the level of kind of open surveillance, next to all the wars, our total lack of control has been made more present to everybody. And I think that may have something to do with why we're seeing a strong feminist resurgence again now, that it's sort of everybody is reacting to the lack of control, and everybody's also getting poorer. We tend to rebel when we become poor. It's in general when cultures rebel, and when large groups of people rebel, and the artists in the same way, that it becomes clear that we're going to earn less from last generation, the possibility of ideas becoming important, and if rebellion goes up. And so maybe what we're seeing is sort of across the board reaction to subjugation.
Everyone's getting bored except for men.
I don't have the time. Do you have the time? I think we'll end here unless panelists have other comments. I mean, I'm sure you do. Okay, so the whole idea of this conversation is really to have an open-ended conversation. I don't think. Yeah, we're not going to reach any conclusions. We really wanted to open some issues to think about and talk about. And yeah, as Jovana said, hang out and see the show. There's also beer and water if you want, so you can enjoy it in different ways. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to the artists. You guys want to say anything else? No? Okay. Thank you all for coming.